His breath was calm, steady, mine wasn't. The light above the kitchen sink flickered slightly as I leaned back against the counter, palms flat on cool marble, eyes locked with his. Neither of us moved, but everything between us did. It was as if the whole world shrank to this very space between our faces. He tilted his head slightly, not forward, just enough to ask a silent question. I didn't answer, not out loud, at least. My eyes must have spoken something because his foot shifted closer. Just an inch. I could hear the clock ticking above the stove. The fridge hum. My own pulse. He opened his mouth. Then. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? The week began with a suitcase and a joke. He stood at the front door, adjusting his tie in the mirror and fumbling with his carry-on. It was still dark outside, and the only sound was the familiar creak of the hallway floor. As usual, he packed last minute and asked where I'd put his shaving kit. I handed it to him without a word, and he kissed my cheek like I was a grandmother. Not a woman. Just habit. I'll call from Austin, he said, lifting his bag. You want me to bring back that barbecue sauce you liked last time? Sure, I said. Salt lick. He laughed. Of course. Nothing but the best. The door clicked shut. I didn't wave. I never did. By the time the taillights vanished into the cul-de-sac fog, I was already refilling the coffee pot. The day blurred. Empty house. Quiet laundry. I watered a plant I forgot I had. The living room was too clean. The hum of the refrigerator louder than it should be. At 11:42 a.m., I got a call from an old family friend. Her son just moved to town. Needed a place to stay for a few days. I said yes before thinking. He arrived an hour later. He had that messy, tired, polite look of someone who'd been in airports too long. A duffel bag over his shoulder, flannel half-buttoned. He smiled like he didn't expect much but hoped I'd offer more. I showed him to the guest room without small talk. He dropped his bag, thanked me, and said, "Cool house." At first, he just stayed in the room. Came out now and then for a bottle of water or to ask for the Wi-Fi password. By evening, we were sitting across from each other at the kitchen island. I nuked some frozen lasagna. He offered to help but didn't insist. You mind music? He asked, holding out his phone. Not at all. Sam Cooke filled the silence. His playlist surprised me, older than I expected. It felt fitting. Familiar. Like he belonged to some era I once lived in. You like this stuff? I asked. Only stuff that makes me feel something. That night I lay in bed longer than usual. Staring at the ceiling fan, thinking of nothing and everything. I wasn't attracted to him. That would have been absurd. But there was something honest in his presence. Something that filled the corners of my house. The next morning, he offered to go to Trader Joe's with me. Said he liked their coffee. I didn't need anything but didn't say no. The aisles were filled with seasonal pumpkin nonsense. He made jokes. I laughed. Loudly. A woman in yoga pants glanced over her shoulder. We passed the butternut squash and stopped at the cheese wall. He held up two identical wedges and said, "What's the real difference between goat and sheep?" I shrugged. Sheep is saltier. Like people. He laughed harder than the joke deserved. At checkout, he insisted on paying. I told him no. He said, "Let me feel useful today." The drive back was short but quiet. Comfortable. A song played softly. I didn't recognize it, but I didn't ask to skip. At home, we unloaded groceries together. He put things away like he'd done it before. The way he placed cans in the pantry, neatly, labels forward, should have annoyed me. It didn't. The sun set early that day. Mid-autumn shadows climbed the walls before dinner. I sat at the table with a glass of wine, and he leaned against the counter with a soda. We talked about nothing. Then something. Then everything. I wanted to be a writer, I said, not sure why. What stopped you? Life. He nodded. That's the most common villain. He told me about a job he hated. A move he regretted. His mother's obsession with NPR and crossword puzzles. The way he sometimes wished he could just hit pause on everything. I like quiet, he said. But not when it feels like silence. We sat there, suspended. I don't remember if I looked away first. Later, a door upstairs squeaked. He offered to fix it. Said he used to help his uncle with carpentry. I stood in the hallway while he unscrewed the hinge, humming to himself. When he was done, the door moved like butter. Thanks, I said. Least I could do. He went into the guest room. Closed the door gently. I walked to my bedroom. Changed into pajamas. Poured another glass of wine. The house was too quiet again. Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo. My husband. Smiling. A woman next to him, holding 2 glasses of wine. Her hand was on his shoulder. They looked like old friends. Or new ones. No text. No caption. Just the image. I stared at it. My hand didn't shake. My breath didn't change. I just sat there, holding the phone like it had heat. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it to myself. I didn't delete it either. I just placed its screen down and walked upstairs. In the hallway, everything was still. I passed the guest room. Stopped. Listened. Nothing. I turned to my room. Sat on the bed. Looked at the ceiling again. Somewhere in the house, a record played softly. Jazz. That night, I didn't dream. Or maybe I did. But if I did, it wasn't about my husband. And it wasn't about me either. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the kitchen like nothing had changed, though everything had. I poured coffee with mechanical precision, the air dense with thoughts I refused to shape into words. He entered quietly, barefoot, hoodie slightly damp from the morning dew. He gave me a nod, not expecting a smile. I gave him one anyway, thin and brittle. We sat on the porch in silence, mugs in hand, the trees rustling above like they were whispering things we weren't ready to say. My phone vibrated once on the armrest, but I ignored it. I didn't have the energy to face what might be waiting behind the screen. A breeze picked up, stirring the wind chimes gently. He took a long sip of coffee and said something about how cold weather always felt more honest. I didn't reply. The quiet between us wasn't awkward, it was too full for that. He changed the subject, talking about a dog he had as a kid. A golden retriever named Donut. He told the story with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. I laughed too, but it felt out of place. By noon, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked as we ran from the car, bags of cold medicine and granola bars in hand, sprinting to the covered pharmacy entrance. A gust of wind pushed rain down sideways. We both ducked under the awning, breathless, soaked, dripping. I should have brought my jacket, he said. You said it'd clear up, I shot back. Yeah, I lie a lot. I looked at him. He was smiling, teeth white against the storm-dark air. My hair clung to my cheek. I wiped it away, eyes still on him. He looked away first. The silence returned. But this time, it felt louder. We made it home with wet socks and squelching sneakers. I tossed him a towel from the laundry room. He caught it in one hand. I dried my arms, then went upstairs to change into something warm. When I came down, he was sitting in the den, feet on the ottoman, flipping through a sketchbook I didn't know he had. Sam Cooke was playing again. He didn't notice me at first. He was sketching, carefully, deliberately. I walked behind him and paused. A face stared up from the page, half-finished. It wasn't me, but something in the expression felt familiar. Tired. Focused. Stuck in between. I said nothing. Neither did he. The fire pit was already lit by sunset. He dragged 2 chairs into the yard, lit the kindling, and made 2 mugs of hot cider. He handed me one wordlessly, the steam curling up between our fingers. "Is this what you do?" I asked. "Make other people's lives feel different?" "I don't know," he said. "Is that what it feels like?" I sipped. "Yeah. It does." We sat, shoulders far apart but thoughts inching closer. The fire crackled. The trees swayed. I tried to remember the last time someone listened to me this long without interrupting, without checking their phone, without turning my words into a problem to solve. "My husband," I said, staring into the flames, "tells stories about me to strangers. Like I'm a character. But he doesn't ask the real ones. He doesn't ask what I want now. Only what I wanted when we met." He didn't respond. Just nodded once, slowly. The mug in his hand steamed like it was hiding something. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, not from the fire. From something else. Something unfamiliar and uninvited. It was almost 10 when I stood to leave the fire. He followed, quietly. I paused at the back door. We both reached for the handle at the same time. Our fingers didn't touch, but the distance between them buzzed like static. Inside, the hallway lights were dim. I stopped at the guest room door, resting my hand on the frame. He stood a step behind me. I turned around. He was there. Right there. And before I could think about what I was doing, before I could second guess or turn away or bury it again, we kissed. Then I pulled away. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. He stepped inside his room and closed the door gently. I walked to the living room. Sat on the couch. The TV was off, the lights low. I stared at the reflection of the room in the dark window. I barely recognized the woman sitting there. The phone lit up again. Same number. My husband. Not a word. Just his name on the screen. I watched it ring. I didn't answer. I let it buzz until it stopped. Until the silence returned and the house held its breath again. I rose to grab a blanket from the linen closet and passed the hallway mirror. For a moment, I saw the version of myself I used to be. The one who always picked up. Always apologized first. Always waited for permission to feel. I turned away. The jazz was still playing somewhere upstairs. That's when I noticed something strange. The suitcase he brought to his duffel, it wasn't by the guest bed anymore. I walked back down the hall. Opened the guest door. The bag was now in the closet. Tucked away. Neatly placed like he wasn't leaving anytime soon. That's when it hit me. He had never said how long he was planning to stay. Never once mentioned it. And I hadn't asked. Not once. I closed the closet door quietly and stepped back. Outside, the rain had started again. This time softer. A hum instead of a roar. I didn't sleep that night. But I didn't lie awake either. I just existed in that space in between, where something had happened, and nothing had happened, and everything was suddenly different. The morning light crept in slowly, indifferent to the night before. I opened my eyes to the soft shuffle of feet in the kitchen downstairs. He was up early. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not tired, just suspended. Something about the air had changed. Like the house had memorized too much. When I finally came down, the table was empty. A single cup of coffee sat waiting for me. He wasn't there. The living room was quiet, curtains drawn. His sketchbook was gone. His hoodie wasn't draped on the back of the chair like it always was. I drank the coffee anyway. Lukewarm. He reappeared 15 minutes later, keys in hand. Said something about a flea market just outside town, nothing special. I didn't plan to go with him, but I found myself getting my coat. We drove without music. The silence wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either. It simply existed, like we did, side by side, no labels, no script. The road twisted through farmland and broken fences, the kind of landscape that makes you think about your own cracks. The flea market stretched across an old fairground lot. Booths of dusty books, handmade soaps, mismatched mugs, tarnished jewelry. We split up briefly. I wandered past faded license plates and rusted keys, fingering a porcelain bird for no reason at all. He found me again by the vintage pins. He held up a small brooch, gold, shaped like a falling leaf, edges chipped. He didn't say anything, just offered it in the palm of his hand. I stared at it too long before taking it. "You don't have to wear it," he said. "I know. But I pinned it on anyway." We left without buying anything else. The brooch remained on my coat the entire ride back. Halfway home, he veered off the main road without warning. "There's a spot," he said. "Just trust me." We wound through back roads I didn't recognize until we reached a quiet overlook. Below, the valley rolled out in shades of brown and amber. A single white barn stood in the distance, and the sky stretched over it like an old quilt. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I stood at the edge, letting the wind press against my chest, almost like it was holding me together. I don't know how long we stayed there. I only remember the sound of gravel under our shoes when we turned back. We stopped for burgers on the way home, one of those old diners where the booths are too narrow and the ketchup bottles are sticky. A waitress with a gravel voice called everyone honey. The walls were covered in black and white photos of people long forgotten. We sat across from each other, unwrapping our food slowly. "I used to want to be a painter," I said, surprising myself. He looked up, chewing. "What happened?" "I got married." He didn't reply right away. That doesn't sound like a reason to stop. I shrugged. It was, though. He wiped his hands, leaned back, didn't push further. Later that night, I skipped my usual call with my husband. The phone stayed on the charger, untouched. Instead, we ended up watching an old black and white film on the couch. It was one I hadn't seen in years, though I remembered the ending perfectly. He quoted a line before the character said it. I smiled without realizing it. The film ended. I stood to get some tea. He followed, walking softly behind me like a shadow I invited in. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed. I turned to speak, to ask something ordinary. But he was already standing too close. We kissed. And then I stepped back. Neither of us said anything. I poured the water. He left the room. The rest of the night passed in silence. I couldn't sleep again. My thoughts dragged me into the garage. I hadn't opened the old storage cabinet in years, the one with the paints and canvas I told myself I'd use again someday. Dust coated everything. The metal hinges squeaked in protest. And there it was. The unfinished painting. It was still stapled to the easel like it had been waiting. The brush strokes were uneven. Half a sky, half a field, half a woman walking away from something unseen. I remembered painting it in one breath, then walking out and never returning. I stared at it for a long time, heart beating faster than it should. Then I closed the cabinet again. Not ready. Not yet. I left the garage light on behind me. That was when I realized I'd forgotten about the brooch. Still pinned to my coat. Still where he'd left it. I didn't remove it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The house was still. My coat still hung by the door, brooch intact, as if untouched by time. I didn't bother with makeup, didn't even brush my hair properly, just tied it up, grabbed a scarf, and went downstairs. He was already in the kitchen. He looked at me and said, "You want to get out of here for a day?" The words fell with quiet certainty, no build-up, no persuasion. Just an open door. I paused. Not because I needed to think. But because I already knew the answer. We packed within minutes. A tote bag with sweaters, a small thermos, a snack from the pantry. He drove. I didn't ask where. The road rolled out endlessly ahead, soft country hills and weathered barns passing like familiar strangers. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The coast met us in the early afternoon. It wasn't a touristy beach. No souvenir stands. Just a strip of sand under an overcast sky and a row of tired beach houses, some shuttered, some sagging. We found one on Airbnb that was still open, barely lived in, but clean enough. Whitewashed floors, mismatched furniture, a candle that smelled like pine already half-burned on the windowsill. I placed my bag on the floor and looked out the window at the sea. The waves weren't violent, just persistent. Soft crashes against the rocks, again and again, like something trying to speak but never quite getting there. We went for a walk before unpacking. He handed me a jacket he'd brought, just in case, and I didn't ask how he knew I'd forget mine. The beach was empty. Only our footprints traced the shore behind us. Driftwood lay scattered like forgotten words. Seagulls called in the distance. I picked up a shell, turned it in my fingers, then tossed it back. He built a small fire pit with rocks he gathered. We didn't talk much while collecting them, but it felt like a conversation anyway. We roasted marshmallows with sticks he'd cut from nearby shrubs. He burned his first one. I didn't. Night came faster by the sea. The horizon vanished into fog. We sat wrapped in a blanket on the sand, our legs stretched out toward the flames. He told me a story about getting lost in Colorado with a friend when he was 17. I told him about the year I almost moved to Chicago alone and backed out at the last minute. We both smiled in ways that carried a tinge of regret. Eventually, neither of us spoke. We just sat, watching the fire fade into embers. Later, in the cabin, I lit the candle in the window and sat on the couch without turning on the lights. He stood by the record player, flipping through the few albums someone had left behind. He found one, an old jazz LP, and placed the needle gently. It cracked and hissed before the music began. He didn't come closer at first. Just stood across from me, like waiting for some invisible sign. We spent night together. I didn't sleep immediately. I stared at the ceiling and traced the faint shadows of tree branches outside. His breathing was slow, steady beside me. The warmth was real, but my thoughts wandered. By morning, the ocean was louder. Gray clouds swirled overhead. I slipped out of bed quietly and padded barefoot to the kitchen. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, then checked my phone, almost without thinking. There it was. A message from my husband. Flight changed. Be home tomorrow. My hand didn't shake. But my body did something strange, somewhere between bracing and relaxing, like a door slamming shut and opening at the same time. He walked in a moment later, hair a mess, voice soft with sleep. He looked at me, then at the phone in my hand. He didn't ask anything. I didn't offer anything. We packed in silence. The air between us wasn't tense, it was fragile. Neither of us wanted to press it too hard. On the drive back, the roads felt longer. Every mile closer to the house carried more weight. More questions. Less answers. He parked the car in the driveway just before dark. The porch light was still on, casting a dim yellow arc across the path. I stepped out slowly, bag in hand, coat zipped up, brooch still pinned. The house looked the same. But I didn't. He didn't walk beside me when we went into the house. He carried his bag in first, disappeared down the hallway, and closed the door behind him without a word. I stood in the entryway, my hand still on the doorknob. The silence of home wrapped around me like something cold and stale. I took a breath and moved quickly. There wasn't time to dwell. The suitcase had to go back in the closet. The laundry, everything I'd worn, needed to be hidden. I moved like someone covering up a crime that no one had yet discovered. I threw the blanket we'd taken on the beach into the washer. Scrubbed the sink. Lit the candle he liked, the one that always made the house smell like fall. Dinner had to be familiar. Meatloaf. Mashed potatoes. I went through the motions with strange clarity, like I'd rehearsed this scene before and knew every beat by heart. The house smelled like nostalgia. My hands worked fast. The timer ticked loud. When I opened the cabinet under the sink for a rag, I saw the edge of a canvas poking out. I froze. Then pulled it slightly. It was mine, the unfinished painting. I hadn't left it there. I had closed it in the garage days ago. I didn't touch it. Just pushed it back where I found it. I sat at the table when the front door opened again. His suitcase hit the hardwood with a soft thud. His footsteps came slow, relaxed. He entered the kitchen and kissed my cheek like he always had. Familiar. Thoughtless. He smelled like airplane air and spearmint gum. He smiled and told me about the delay at the Austin airport. About the weather in Texas. About how someone spilled wine on his shoe at the mixer. I listened. I nodded. My smile was automatic. He didn't ask anything. He didn't ask how my week was. He didn't ask if I went anywhere. He didn't ask about the guest still staying under our roof. I served the meal. He sat down and complimented the potatoes. I kept my hands steady as I passed the butter. The candle flickered between us like it was trying to whisper something neither of us wanted to hear. The guest came down a few minutes later. He looked like he'd barely slept, but his shirt was clean, his jaw freshly shaved. He gave me a glance so brief it could have passed as nothing. He greeted my husband with a handshake. It lasted a second longer than it should have. Then silence. We sat like three strangers forced to share a table at an airport diner. The forks clinked. The chairs creaked. No one said much. He cleared his throat once. Then asked if it was okay to take a shower after dinner, said he had an early day tomorrow. Of course, my husband said. Halfway through the meal, without warning, the guest stood. I think I should head out, he said. I've stayed long enough. The words didn't feel rehearsed, but they weren't raw either. They felt like the end of something carefully packed. I put my fork down. My husband looked up but didn't stop chewing. You don't have to, I said. He shook his head. I think I do. He walked out. No suitcase. No bags. Just his coat. The door shut behind him, soft and final. We sat there, the two of us, like nothing had happened. And then I realized something. My husband never asked where I was all week. Never asked what I'd done, where I went, who I was with. He talked about Austin. He talked about the people. But he never once looked at me long enough to notice anything had changed. He didn't see me. He never did. And for the first time, I understood something far worse than suspicion or confrontation. He didn't care. The next morning, I opened the guest room door slowly. The bed was made. Every corner of the blanket tucked tight. The small travel shampoo in the bathroom was gone. The outlet beside the nightstand was empty, no charger left behind, no forgotten socks, no stray receipt. The only sign he had ever been there was the faint smell of his cologne on the pillowcase. But even that was starting to fade. I stood still for several minutes. Not thinking. Not moving. Just absorbing the absence. Downstairs, my husband was already gone. His work bag missing from the coat rack, his coffee mug rinsed and left upside down in the sink. A post-it note sat on the counter, meeting downtown. Be home late. The same handwriting that once left me love notes on hotel napkins now served as a timestamp for disengagement. I started cleaning without deciding to. Stripped the sheets. Carried the bedding to the laundry room. Disinfected the doorknobs. Vacuumed under the bed. Scrubbed the tiles in the bathroom like something was buried in the grout. I opened the windows to let the air change. By noon, the house looked untouched. As if no one had come, no one had stayed, no one had kissed me by the kitchen sink or held my hand under the stars. I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around like I'd just broken into my own life. I needed out. I grabbed my keys, a scarf, and headed to the art supply store across town, the one I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. The parking lot was half full. The same bell above the door rang when I walked in. The same old man behind the counter barely looked up. I made my way down the aisles, trailing my fingers over sketch pads, brushes, tubes of oil paint. It felt like trespassing on a version of myself I had forgotten how to be. I gathered a small basket of items, brushes, a new set of paints, a blank canvas. The young cashier rang them up slowly, glancing at me with a vague kind of politeness. When he asked if I needed a bag, I shook my head. Outside, I sat in my car, holding the canvas in my lap, staring at the dashboard like I was waiting for instructions. I didn't cry. I just sat. Until the sun had shifted and the shadows on the windshield moved like ghosts. Back home, I set up everything in the dining room. Not the garage, too distant. Not the bedroom, too close. The dining table felt neutral. I laid the canvas flat, uncapped a brush, and dipped it in color. The first stroke was a disaster. Too heavy. I wiped it. Tried again. Too light. I pulled out another brush, then another, moving quickly, impatiently. Paint smeared and pooled in places I hadn't planned. I kept going. Something had to come out. By sunset, the canvas was covered in thick, uneven layers. Abstract, chaotic. It made no sense. It looked like noise. I stared at it and hated it. Tore it off the easel and threw it into the trash bin. I started another. Same result. I began a third, hand trembling with urgency, but I couldn't hold focus. Everything I tried to paint came out wrong. Like the image in my mind wouldn't translate. Or maybe I didn't know what the image was. I tossed the third canvas aside and leaned back in my chair, my fingers covered in paint, my breath uneven. I didn't try a fourth. That night, I reheated leftovers. Ate alone in silence. My husband texted once to say he'd eaten with a client. I didn't respond. I walked past the guest room again. The bed still made. The closet empty. The air still smelled like detergent. Upstairs, I opened my phone and stared at his name in my contacts. I hovered over it. Then pressed delete. The name vanished like it had never been saved at all. The next morning, I woke early and walked. Not around the neighborhood. Not where anyone knew me. I drove to the edge of town, parked at an empty trailhead, and followed a winding path into the woods. No headphones. No phone in hand. Just footsteps and frost-covered leaves underfoot. The air smelled sharp and clean. Birds moved in branches above. I walked until my calves ached, until I couldn't think anymore. On the way back, I took a different route. Past a narrow street with modest homes and trimmed lawns. A house with a red door had a for sale sign in the window. A dog barked behind a fence. When I reached my car, I felt strangely clear. Back home, I showered, changed, and tried to paint again. This time, slower. Less pressure. Still, the brush didn't move right. By mid-afternoon, I gave up again. The knock came just as I was washing my hands. I opened the door to find my neighbor, holding a container of cookies, a ribbon tied around the lid. She smiled, friendly and oblivious, talking about how she made too many. She handed me the tin. Her smile faded slightly as she looked at me. "You okay?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Just tired." She didn't press. Just squeezed my arm and left. I placed the tin on the counter. Sat down. And for the first time in days, I let the silence surround me without resisting it. After a few minutes, I opened my laptop to check email. Nothing urgent. Nothing new. Then, tucked between ads and coupons, one subject line stood out. No sender name. No signature. Just one sentence. Paint what you never said. I stared at the subject line on my screen longer than I should have. Paint what you never said. No name. No sender. No signature. I checked the address, it wasn't saved, just a string of characters that meant nothing. But the timing, the phrasing, the stillness it stirred inside me, everything about it felt deliberate. Known. I closed the laptop without answering. There was nothing to say. That evening, I returned to the garage. The cold in the air settled in my bones, but I didn't mind it. I dragged out the first unfinished canvas, the one I had abandoned over a decade ago. It was warped at the edges, dust still clinging to the corners. I didn't stretch it. I didn't fix it. I just propped it on the easel, sat down, and stared. I stayed there for hours. Not painting. Just observing. By midnight, I dipped a brush in black and made a single line across the bottom. It wasn't a beginning. It was a dare. The next day, I drove downtown and stopped in front of the museum. I hadn't been in years. It stood like it always had, tall and quiet, with glass that reflected the sky like a mirror that refused to show you yourself. Inside, it smelled of old wood, clean walls, and something sacred. I moved slowly, room to room, passing Monet, Hopper, O'Keeffe. None of them stirred anything in me. Until Wyeth. It wasn't one of the famous ones. It was quiet. A farmhouse, a hill, a woman in the middle distance. Everything was muted, gray-toned, cold. I stood in front of it for too long. My eyes blurred. My chest tightened. I wasn't crying, not really. Just leaking. Behind me, someone walked past. Their steps echoed through the gallery. I didn't turn around. On the way out, I stopped at the museum shop and bought a small print of the piece. I folded it and tucked it in my coat pocket. I didn't go home. I drove to a nearby coffee shop instead. One I hadn't been to since before marriage became a routine and routine became a wall. I sat near the window with a black coffee and a pen, scribbled notes on a napkin I didn't need. Shapes. Colors. Fragments of sentences. A woman passed outside with a child who looked just like my niece. But I had no niece. Later that week, I met an old friend for coffee. Someone from high school. She had messaged me months ago asking to catch up, and I had ignored it. But now I responded. We met at a place that used to be a bookstore and was now a smoothie bar that played jazz covers of pop songs. She talked a lot. About her kids, about her job, about how the town felt smaller than it used to. I nodded and smiled. At some point she asked how I was doing. Different, I said. She didn't press. I almost told her everything. I could feel it rising in my throat, thick and electric. But then I remembered how much easier it is to leave things unnamed. So I changed the subject. The following morning, I drove out to the overlook. The same one he had taken me to. I parked at the edge and walked out to the bluff. The view hadn't changed. The barn in the distance still sat nestled in the valley like something waiting to be remembered. This time, I stayed until sunset. The sky burned orange and purple, and the cold wind wrapped around me without mercy. I didn't move. I didn't take pictures. I didn't speak. I just stayed. Back in town, I stopped by an old building with cracked windows and a faded for lease sign. I had driven past it hundreds of times without noticing. That day I stopped. I called the number. Met the landlord. The space was small, concrete floors, brick walls, one window high up like a prison opening. It was perfect. 2 days later, I signed the lease. Paid the first month in cash. I didn't tell anyone. Each day after that, I drove there in the early morning before work and stayed late into the night after dinner. I brought my old paints, the ruined canvases, a heater from the garage, and an old stool with a cracked seat. I worked until my hands cramped. I didn't aim for beauty. I aimed for honesty. For whatever that meant. At home, I spoke less and less. My husband didn't notice. Or maybe he preferred it. We shared space, not time. Not questions. Not truth. One evening, while moving things in the studio, I found the brooch. I hadn't remembered taking it off. I was sure I hadn't. But there it was, tucked inside a sketchbook I hadn't opened since we came back from the coast. I stared at it for a long time. It looked duller now. Less golden. As if it knew something had changed. I put it back in the book. Closed the cover. And didn't open it again. The invitation came folded into a cream envelope. Hand-delivered. No fanfare. Just a note inside, a showcase at the community gallery downtown. Someone had nominated me, it said. Emerging local voices. My name was listed among 7 others. I stared at it, reread it twice, and set it down without reacting. That night, over reheated chicken and frozen peas, I mentioned it to my husband. There's a local art exhibit next month, I said. He didn't look up from his plate. Oh yeah? I'll be in it. He nodded, chewed slowly. That's nice. That was all. The gallery sat on a side street across from a bakery I used to take my mother to. The showcase was modest, maybe 30 people in the room when I arrived. Soft jazz from a Bluetooth speaker. Wine in plastic cups. Name tags with first names only. I didn't wear mine. My canvas hung near the back. I had chosen the older painting, the one I'd torn off the easel and nearly thrown away. It was unfinished, uneven, thick with failure and something raw underneath. I didn't frame it. I didn't touch it up. I just let it be what it was. People passed by it with tilted heads, quiet nods, the occasional murmur. A few lingered. No one asked anything. I stood several feet away, watching. The lighting was too warm. My hands were cold. I walked to the restroom at one point just to breathe. Stared at myself in the mirror under harsh bulbs. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Not because she had changed, but because I had never really seen her. When I stepped out again, I scanned the room automatically. And paused. For a moment, just beyond the center wall, I saw him. Just a silhouette. Familiar. Hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, head turned toward one of the other pieces. I couldn't move. Couldn't blink. The crowd shifted, someone walked past, and when I looked again. Gone. I walked that direction anyway, slowly, pretending to look at other works. But it was just a trick of light. A man with similar posture. Someone else's outline. He wasn't there. I returned to my painting. Stood in front of it. People continued to pass. Then I leaned in, reached behind the canvas, and taped a small folded note to the back. Just 6 words, written in pencil. I was here. You mattered. No one noticed. When I stepped outside, the night had shifted. Cold, almost metallic in the air. The sidewalk glistened faintly from a brief drizzle. Cars rolled past lazily, their headlights catching puddles like ghosts moving across the street. I stood there for a moment, just watching. No coat. Just the blouse and scarf. The air pinched my skin, but I didn't pull away from it. Behind me, inside, people kept moving. Laughing. Drinking. Talking about color palettes and texture and composition. Out here, it was quieter. A black car pulled up along the curb. It didn't stop fast. Didn't honk. Just rolled to a gradual halt. The passenger window slid down slowly. I didn't step closer. I didn't retreat. I only looked. And my breath caught. My heart didn't race. My body didn't tremble. But something shifted beneath my ribs, low and deep and old. The figure inside didn't speak. Didn't gesture. Didn't smile. Just looked at me. And then. Darkness.